latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and for this episode I am absolutely delighted that I'm going to be joined by Mark Tonelli. I reviewed Mark's new album Brasiliana, a few months ago now, and this collection of tunes celebrates composer and guitarist Mark Tonelli's many visits to Brazil over 4 years. And it's a country he's come to love. So I hope you enjoy listening to my conversation talking to Mark about Brasiliana. What you're listening to now is Velha Alma, which is a lovely beginning to this album. And I hope you enjoy listening into my conversation with Mark. Hello, Mark.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very good, thanks.
Hey, let's talk about Brasiliana.
Okay.
It's a great album, as you know, because I reviewed it.
You did, and I appreciate the review. Thanks very much. I'm glad that you've been enjoying it.
So can you tell my listeners how Brasiliana came about, the album, because it's a very interesting project.
Yeah, it is an interesting project and one that I never really thought would happen. It came about because, I've had this budding interest in Brazil most of my life. It started when I was a little kid. My mom had some Jobim records, and I just kind of studied the album cover and thought he looked kind of mysterious and interesting, and Jobim didn't sound like a name that, was familiar. And then as I got older and started studying music and guitar specifically, which is my instrument, I had a guitar teacher that got me into jazz, and Brazilian music is part of the jazz repertoire. So I got interested in the music through that. Then I heard the lyrics in Portuguese. I heard Gal Costa singing something in Portuguese. I didn't know it was her at the time. And I was just hypnotized. I was enchanted by the sound of the language. I wanted to know what she was saying. Even if she was just saying gibberish, I just loved the sound of it. So, there was this interest in the enchanting sound of the language. Then I continued studying the music, and eventually, years later, I'll back up a second. After I heard Gal Costa, I started seeing some pictures of Rio, some of the tourist places, and I thought, this place looks amazing. These people they write beautiful music. The sound of the language is beautiful, and the physical beauty of the country is astounding. I've got to go to this place. And I said that for like 30 years. I just never thought I'd go. I just dreamed about going to Brazil. And then several years ago, I started studying the language just sort of on a whim, not really even realizing what I was about to do was going to change my life. And that was it. I was hooked. I couldn't get enough of Brazil and the language and the music, the culture. I studied anywhere from like 2 to 5 hours a day in those first couple of years. I treated it like a new instrument, like I was learning another musical instrument. And I thought, well, I've really got to come in contact with this culture. I need to go there, both to, practice my language and just to see this place that I've been dreaming about and that now I've been really seriously studying. I eventually got a Fulbright scholarship to go there and teach at a university. And I was able to stay there for 5 months for a full semester, teach at the university, travel throughout the country, perform in the city I was in, which is called Uberlândia, which is the second largest city in the state of Minas Gerais, which is a large state. Pelé is from Minas Gerais. And so I just fell in love with the country, the food, the architecture, the streets, the vibe, and the people. That's really what won me over, was the warm, loving, affectionate Brazilian people who received me so well during that first visit. And I didn't want to come home. I was not ready to come back to the US. It was really hard to do so. And I was kind of lost for a couple of months when I eventually did come back because, like I was physically here, my body was here, but my heart was still in Brazil. So I thought, I've got to go back. And so I did. I kept going back. I took students there on an exchange, and we had the students perform in an ensemble that I created. of all Brazilian, mostly Brazilian music and some jazz. We did 5 performances in the city where I had done my Fulbright grant. And then I just kept returning to perform, to travel, to give master classes and lectures. And eventually, I married a Brazilian. And so a lot of my trips these days are to visit my wife. And she's in the immigration process to come to the US. But in the meantime, we're going back and forth and visiting each other. But when I go back, I'm often performing or giving lectures or traveling. And so, or sometimes doing recruiting for my university. I was able to set up the first agreement, first accord for an exchange of students with my university and a Brazilian university. And so that was kind of an historic moment. And we're starting to receive the first Brazilian students. So that's pretty exciting. And so I just came back a couple weeks ago, not even, from my 15th trip to Brazil. After so many trips, actually, after the first one, I just felt such a loss that I started writing music to deal with the sense of loss, this kind of missing and longing for the country, which Brazilians have a really special word to describe this, which is called saudade. And we don't have that word in English, but it sort of captures that feeling of longing and missing and nostalgia and emotions all kind of wrapped up in one word. And so I started writing music to, to deal with these intense feelings I had of longing. And then I just kept writing, and each trip would bring new inspiration, new ideas, new experiences as I performed with Brazilian musicians, as I traveled throughout the country, as I visited different cities, as I got to know more music, more composers. They inspired me to continue writing. When I met my wife, that was another great source of inspiration. And there are a few songs on the album about her or about us, And on the 13th trip, I got a second Fulbright grant to Brazil, and my project was to make a recording of these compositions that I had been writing about my lived experiences in Brazil and also about my sense of longing for Brazil. And that's why the record is called Brasiliana, which is like saying Americana, but sort of about things that are Brazilian, the essence of Brazilian culture. And, the songs are essentially that. They're expressing the essence of Brazilian culture through my eyes, through my lived experiences there.
That would explain why there is a sense of them being Brazilian with an American touch or American with a Brazilian touch. They're that mixture, aren't they? Some of them are more Brazilian with an American touch, and some of them are American jazz, more traditional jazz with that taste of Brazil.
Some of them are. That's a good insight. The recording was made in Brazil with an all Brazilian band, and I needed musicians who could do both things, who could play the Brazilian styles well, and then who could also play jazz styles well. And I had been performing in Brazil for so many years and got to know so many different musicians that I really was able to put together sort of a dream band, that was able to realize these different styles. There was a conscious effort for some of these songs to write in Brazilian styles. For example, the very first song I wrote after returning to the US from Brazil for the first time is called Velha Alma, which means old soul. And that was written in a bossa nova style, very traditional Brazilian jazz style. And I did that by design. I wanted that song to be about Brazil as played in a Brazilian style. That was part of the longing, was to capture my feelings about Brazil. So it seemed, only appropriate, only fitting that it would be in a Brazilian style. As I continued writing, however, sometimes the songs just didn't seem like they should be written in a Brazilian style. Maybe they were more in a jazz style or sort of in a mix or sort of something that you can't really categorize. But even so, the subject matter of the songs is still about Brazil. And you can sort of, I think, at least the idea was that you can sort of still feel the longing and feel the influence of Brazil, even if it's not explicitly, the song is not explicitly played in a Brazilian style.
However it kind of comes together, there's definitely that uh, touching on both, which I think is really, really interesting. The one I want to talk to you about most is Four-Sided Circle, which I think is a really interesting chat track. And I'd like to start by playing a little clip of it. So, how did you compose that, and where did you start from with that one?
That one actually falls in the minority category of songs that were written pre-Brazil. Uh, 6 of the 9 songs on the recording were written post-Brazil, but a few of them were written pre-Brazil. That's one of them. And I had a group of songs, a small collection of songs, just kind of sitting on the shelf that I had written in the years before I went to Brazil that I never wound up recording, but I felt were strong songs that, deserved to be on a recording. And this recording seemed like a good opportunity to record those songs. So that one I wrote probably a few years before I even went to Brazil. So, a good 8 or 9 years ago, I think I wrote that. No, not quite that long, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, something like that. And the title just kind of came to me, how when you fall asleep and you're in that sort of semi-conscious state where you're still awake and you're aware of things, but your mind is like in this really relaxed state, and unusual thoughts come to your mind, sometimes very, with a certain clarity to them, that it's more difficult to achieve in a conscious state. And the term four-sided circle came to me as I was falling asleep that night. I don't know why. There's no such thing as a four-sided circle. You can't have one, geometrically speaking. It's impossible. But I liked the idea. And I can't remember if I had already written the piece or if I had, or if the song title inspired the piece. I don't remember right now. But it does happen in essentially 4 sections that don't necessarily always repeat or relate to each other, although there is a certain logic as the song progresses. And so I guess that would be, sort of the circular nature of the song, but that also has 4 sides to it at the same time. I think I was listening at the time to a lot of Dave Douglas and Chris Potter. Those guys are huge influences on my writing, on my playing, but more on my writing. And I actually got to work with Dave Douglas a little bit when I was in the West Point Band's Jazz Nights. It was a military jazz band that I played in for 10 years. That's in residence at the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York. And he lived close by and brought in some of his big band arrangements that we got to play. And then we also got to play at the Jazz Standard as part of the Festival of New Trumpet Music, or FONT. And that was run by Dave, and he liked the band, and so put us on the festival. And his music is sublime. The arrangements that he brought in were just I really can't describe. They sound like they're improvised. Like an entire big band arrangement sounds like it's improvised. He writes in such an organic way that I want to write that way. I want to write in a way where everything just feels fluid, where you don't know what's been written ahead of time and what's been improvised. And so I think a lot of some of the ideas for Four-Sided Circle probably came, subconsciously from Dave Douglas.
Yeah, because I think that's one of the things I liked about it was I couldn't tell because sometimes when I listen to jazz recordings, I can absolutely tell where the writing stops and the improvising begins. But with this one, it was much more a sense of what was right, and it didn't matter whether it was improvised or written, actually.
Yeah, just sort of heard I think the initial idea, da ba do da da, that kind of like this tritone idea, that just came from a practice session. That's where most of my ideas come from. I think most writers have an idea that they sort of stumble on by accident, and you're practicing, you're fooling around or whatever, messing around, and you hear an idea that sort of strikes your fancy, and you're like, whoa, that's kind of cool. Let me chase that. And that's, I think, what happened. And then from just that little germ of an idea, the whole composition sprang, and just one section just sort of suggested the next section. Um, and that's kind of how it happened. And the nice thing about playing with the musicians in Brazil is that they were able to play that piece really authentically. You wouldn't think, oh, that sounds like Brazilian musicians playing jazz. You just think that sounds like jazz musicians. And so
Yeah,
they really were able to pull off all the different sections of the piece and make it feel cohesive.
yeah. So, what are your plans for? I mean, the album's been out for a couple of months now. Are you touring it? Are you gonna tour it? What are your plans?
Yeah, I've been playing some of the selections from the album on gigs. We did a launch party uh, about a week after the album came out. It came out on March 13th, and so the following week, March 21st, we did a launch party gig. I did that in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. They have a beautiful venue there called Scout Hall, and I had already played a show there with kind of a Brazilian show, and I thought this would be a perfect venue for the launch concert. And so that went really well. And what we did on that show, which was, I've never done this before, was that we played selections from the album. We also played other music as well. But, there was a filmmaker who got interested in my story and approached me about making a documentary about the making of the album and the background behind it and the events in my life that led me up to going to Brazil, returning many times, and eventually making this album. And we finished. We worked on it together over the course of about 6 months and finished it, I guess, about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months. It's on a festival circuit right now. It was recently accepted to a film festival in Spain, the Madrid Indie Film Festival. And we're hoping to be accepted to other festivals as well. So the film will debut later this year. But I premiered the trailer for the film at the concert, and then sort of did a Q&A with the audience about the film and about the album. And so it was kind of this three-part adventure. Play the music,
Wow.
show the trailer, have a Q&A. And the most exciting, most fun part was the Q&A. People had really interesting questions. There were some Brazilians in the audience. They had questions, And then there were some Americans who had been to Brazil, so they had questions. And then just people who were sort of interested in this, I guess, a fairly unusual project for an American.
Yeah.
Spend so much time in Brazil, make a recording there, and then have a film made about the recording. So it, it generated a lot of interesting discussion. So I'm trying to do that. That's what I'm touring, is that project.
Yeah.
And so I have some lined up for the fall. I'll be in Iowa, Tennessee, and Kentucky doing that. So I have a little tour lined up for the fall. In the meantime, I'm also playing with my band, my Brazilian band here in the US, based in St. Louis, called A Folia. And so we're also doing some of that music. And we'll actually be on a TV show in St. Louis in a couple of weeks called My St. Louis Live. And the music part is called The Stage. So we'll be on this show called The Stage. And we'll do some of that music there. And then the next day, we'll actually do a concert in St. Louis at a club called the Dark Room. So that's kind of what I'm doing
Ah.
with the project.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that idea of showing a trailer and then having a Q&A and also doing the music because it kind of brings everything in, doesn't it? It brings the story in, but also the music that sort of partly tells the story, but is certainly inspired by the story.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when you go to a concert, there might be some visuals, right? There might be a screen where you see a, a close-up of the performer, or there might be some sort of like special effects or whatever on the screen that enhance the show, especially if it's a pop show, right? That doesn't happen so much at jazz shows, however. You just go and you listen to the music because the music sort of
Mm.
speaks for itself, right? Not that pop music doesn't do that, but you know, the visual aspect is very much part of the spectacle of a pop show, not so much with jazz. So just the idea that we have this visual aspect and that it's about the music and the recording that we're playing the music from adds a dimension that I just think people don't necessarily expect. The launch
Yeah.
show was very successful, so I'm hoping that the future shows, the sort of more shows I'm doing with this idea of the film and the Q&A, wind up being just as interesting for audiences.
Yeah, and I love the concept of that because it's about people from one culture trying to understand people from another culture. And that's a wonderful thing.
You said that perfectly. You know, one of the taglines we've been using for the film, and by the way, if your listeners are interested, they can check out the film's Instagram page. It's called Brasiliana, the film. Or they can just go to my Instagram page, mark.tonelli. Um, you know, one of the taglines we've been using is a love story between two nations. And that's something that I actually say in the film in one of the interviews in the film. That's for me how it feels going back and forth to Brazil over so many years. Um, One thing I've noticed traveling a lot to other countries as well. I've been very fortunate to do a lot of traveling, including I've spent quite a bit of time in England years ago when I was working on a cruise ship and love UK culture and so wonderful, so charming. Everybody was so friendly and so nice, and I actually really loved the food too, you know. Um, so just having traveled a lot, but more specifically recently to Brazil, you just learn that people are the same wherever you go. They have the same hopes, the same dreams, the same aspirations. Um, and we sort of get hung up on the differences, but I think the commonalities, what we have in common, are much more important. And that's what I've discovered in Brazil, that um, they like Americans, especially in the smaller cities. If you go to São Paulo, where I have spent a considerable amount of time, they're more used to tourists and used to Americans. But really, outside those big cities like Rio and São Paulo, an American at all, never mind an American who stays for a length of time and performs and teaches in a small city, that's a total novelty for them. And I have literally been treated like I was royalty in some of these cities. It was so humbling. The people were so lovely, so wonderful. And how can you not love them? You know, how can you just not want to keep going back and being around such wonderful people who are so open? So that openness to receive another culture, to learn about another culture, that's for me one of the biggest lessons in going back and forth to Brazil. And I've tried to bring that lesson back to the US and spread Brazilian culture here, which is not something that we study in the US. We don't study Brazilian history, we don't study Brazilian culture. We're lucky if we learn enough about our own culture and geography, you know, in school. And so when I perform concerts, I make a point of telling the stories of my experiences in Brazil. Sometimes I may tell the story about how I learned a particular song we're playing, or what inspired it, or where I was, or you know um, who suggested the song to me, recommended it to me. And people come up after the concerts and they say, you know, I felt like I went to Brazil. I've never been there, but through your descriptions, I really felt like I went there, and I love so much that you told those stories. And for them, that's you know sometimes the most meaningful part, connecting the music with the people, with the culture. Um, and if I can do in some small way, if I can break down some barriers that we as human beings seem to have when we arbitrarily draw lines and borders across nations, then I feel like I've done something good.
Absolutely. I think that's wonderful, and that's the sense that I got from the tracks, from the tunes, and then from really immersing myself in that whole album, and then sort of finding out about the story about how it actually happened. I think it's a wonderful thing, and I think if we can do something about breaking barriers down wherever we are in the world, I think that's a really good thing. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks so much for your interest in the album. I'm glad you're enjoying it. You said that you immersed yourself in the album, so I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I really liked it. Really, really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward. I'm going to definitely check out the film when I can.
Yeah, the film will come out later this year after it's done its festival run. Festivals want exclusivity, so if you
Yeah.
premiere a film, if you show it publicly, you can't participate in the festival. And the festival is what generates traction and publicity and interest and, maybe future distribution. So we want to obey the
Yeah,
festival rules.
definitely. Well, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Mark. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Oh, likewise, Hilary. Thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed so much the conversation.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Mark Tonelli about Brasiliana, and I look forward to seeing the film later in the year. And I shall definitely be checking out the trailer. I'll put all the links in the show notes. What you're listening to now is End of an Era. Please do share, rate and review this episode wherever you get your podcasts. And tell your friends about Harmonious World, because as Mark said, it's all about breaking down the borders. Thank you for joining me once more for Harmonious World, and I hope you have a good week. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.